All right, welcome to Tanfoglio Tuning 101. I'll be your instructor, Professor Angry Matt. Here's the new patient. We've got a brand new Tanfoglio IFG Defiant Stock Master. Already has the SRO milling done by Patriot Defense, has the Patriot Defense grips on it. Put those on first thing. So I shot this today, no trigger work on it at all. Just picked it up today, and we're gonna do the full trigger tune job. Here's my original stock 2, first gun I made GM with. The original one that I shot this entire time for the last 6 years. Also has an SRO milled by Patriot Defense. This has all the trigger work in it, all the extra parts that we're going to go over in a minute. Single side safety, Patriot Defense palm swell grips, the extreme hammer, all the internal springs, all the polishing, all the stuff, and a worn out ugly Cerakote job. So just real quick to go over what we're going to do. All the springs, hammer spring, sear spring, trigger return spring, replace the hammer, fit the safety, all the good stuff. So just so you get an idea what the final result should look like, here's the trigger job. Now you can't really tell the weight. Obviously this is 5 or 6 pounds. And then with a single action with the Patriot Defense Bolo, that's the pre-travel I get. 2 1/4 pound trigger, reset, so there we go. On the stock one, that's I don't know, 10-pound trigger. It's not great. And then single action, a lot more pre-travel, a little bit of creep there, and more reset. And the reset's a little slow and gritty. You can see I'm letting it out slow, and it's kind of being choppy as it gets to the reset position. That's just because the internals need to be polished there. So let's get started. So let's go through the goodie bag. All the stuff we have. Extreme trigger bar guide. This is what pushes up on the bottom of the trigger bar. I like the extreme one because it's already pre-polished a little bit, but we'll still polish this. That's not really necessary. You can polish the stock one and get the same effect, but I was being lazy. The extreme hammer, the Titan hammer. It's a heavier hammer, wax the primers a little bit better, and it has better geometry and hammer hooks than the stock one, so we always put that on. These are some recoil springs for the stock 2 that actually won't ever work because this slide is a 1/4 inch longer. This is the Bolo interrupter, so this is the short reset disconnector. If you guys are coming from the CZ world, that would be what the short reset disconnector kit is, pretty much the same thing. Firing pin spring, hammer spring. I use the big heavy one because I want it to whack every primer and it doesn't affect the trigger pull that much. This is a 15.5 pound. Some people run down to 13 pounds. You know, 14's not bad. It should whack everything, but you need to replace them every couple thousand rounds if you're not using federal primers constantly, and I don't feel like messing with it. So that's what we use. Patriot Defense extended firing pin. We like the extended pin, wax the primers better also. And then here's the little guys. This is a sear spring, tiny little guy in there. Sear spring, the trigger return spring pretty much looks very similar. Tiny little guy there. That'll probably shoot across the room once or twice during this whole project, so get used to that. One-piece sear. The actually, you know what? I don't know if the IFG guns come with a one-piece sear, so we'll check that. The stock 2 comes with a 2-piece sear. Basically, there's 2 parts to it, and the first part disengages the firing pin safety as you pull the trigger, and then the second part is the actual sear that engages the hammer hooks. So this obviously is one piece, and the extreme part comes a little bit more. Actually, these look nicer than the ones I've gotten in the past. A little bit more polished. It's like a chrome finish or something like that. They always have this little machine mark, or not machine mark, casting mark on the bottom, which I hate because you can feel that in the trigger pull when the hammer rubs under the sear. But we may not even need that. So let's see what that's inside of this gun. Disassembly wise, first thing, bring the slide back till those two circles are lined up, and push the slide stop pin out of the way. So I am going to use the back of this punch because I'm weak today. Push that out, comes out a little bit, pull the slide back, pull that out. Push the slide off the front. Oh yeah, this is a two-piece sear. So you can see on the sear there's a little, I guess that's a little pin. Honestly, I've never looked at how these go together because I just throw them out. So let's see if we can see how it works. When you pull the trigger, well, they move in one fell swoop, but this piece does move separately. You can push down on this part. This is the part that engages the firing pin block, and then this is the main part that engages the hammer hooks. So we're going to take this out. We don't want to deal with that. It does affect the trigger pull, and we don't want it, so we're going to throw that out. Replace that spring, replace this spring, polish everybody inside of here, be good to go. So the next step would be to take the safety out. But I'll show you guys how to fit the safety, because when you replace the hammer with the extreme hammer, the safety needs fitting. I'll show you where that needs to be fitted. So let's explain what we did. To take the ambi safety off, you need to drive a punch down from the top, take out the pin that's in here. And to get the pin out, you need to take the grips off because the grips interfere with getting it out. So the grip is off. Take the pin out. The ambi side comes off. This goes in the trash. I don't use these. I don't like them. And then here we are. So to get the strong side safety off, decock it, and then you can use almost any tool for this, a small punch, small screwdriver. We'll see if this will work. Basically the sear leg, the leg of the sear spring, has to come out of this groove and into this little notch. It's kind of where it gets retained and kept when we're doing this operation. So there's a spot for it, and you go up under the sear spring, and this is harder when they're stock and easier once you put an aftermarket sear spring in. There we go. So now the sear spring is up on the ledge, and the sear spring goes through a groove on the safety here, and that's what keeps the safety from walking out. So on the single side safety, the sear spring in here keeps the safety from coming out, so there's nothing else that needs to hold it in. And then once that's out of the way, you can just rotate this guy out. Let's see, there we go. And when you take this out, the sear cage wants to pop out. So this is out. Let's get our parts bin here. Safety in there. Here's the sear cage. That's held in place by the safety. Now we're left with this. So next, we're going to take out the hammer pin, which is this little guy here. And this captures the hammer pin, keeps it from sliding out the left side of the gun. So that just pushes up. It's not under any tension at all. The top of the sear cage, or I should say the bottom of the sear cage, prevents this from sliding out the top of the gun and disappearing. So it's trapped in there once the gun is together. There we go. That little guy, and I've lost that a handful of times, keeps the hammer pin from walking out. So once the hammer pin is gone, to get our punch, you push the hammer pin out from this side, and the hammer will fly off the top once you do that. So a little downward tension on the hammer. Push the pin out. There you go. Now the pin is out, but the punch is still in there, so the hammer won't fly out. So just capture the hammer, pull the punch out, and there's the hammer, disconnector, and the hammer strut on there, and the 4,000 pound stock hammer spring, which we also will throw out. Find the punch, knock over the can of Monster. So we're going to drive this punch out. This is going to take the trigger and the trigger bar out. And what we're going to do is raise the gun up with this little gunsmithy block. And one thing to keep in mind is once you drive this out, well, two things. You don't have to drive the pin all the way out of the frame. If you drive it out of this side and out of the trigger and leave it hanging out of this side, it makes your life easier down the road. So we'll try to do that. And then the other thing is when you pull the punch out, the trigger spring will go absolutely flying across the planet. If you're going to be replacing it like we are, it doesn't matter. But if you're taking your gun apart for maintenance and you're going to reuse that spring, keep an eye on where that flies or cover the top of the gun so it doesn't fly out. So we'll try that. So we're going to pull the punch out and cover it. Trigger spring hit the bottom of my hand. There it is. So that's going in the stuff we won't use pile. And let's see, that's how far the pin is sticking out now. Will the trigger bar come out? Yep, so here we go. So the trigger bar comes out. It's supposed to come out. There we go. Comes out and the pin stays there. So that's convenient for later. We'll have to readdress assembling it with that in that spot. Makes life easier. And then the last thing is this trigger bar plunger, which is right here. This pushes up on the bottom of the trigger bar. That's what gives you your reset feel, and it contributes a little bit to the trigger pull weight, because this has to be compressed from the top when you pull the trigger. So we're going to take this out, just basically push up on the bottom with a punch. And this also captures the magazine catch spring and plunger. So you put your thumb over there while you're doing this. Magazine catch just came loose. I dropped it, probably lost every part of it. Nope. So we're good with the magazine catch. And now the trigger bar plunger. Trigger bar guide is what? Got some rust on it from the factory. Those are just brass shavings. But that's the that's what it looks like. And this is the one that'll be replacing it. So as far as polishing and cleaning, well, let's get to one thing first. For the sear, we're going to take out this two-piece sear and get rid of it. So this is the sear pin. It's just a press fit in there. There's nothing holding it in. When it's in the gun, it's captured like this, so it can't escape. So to get it out, you just push from the one side. These are tight when they're new. There we go. So that's the sear pin right there. And then we're going to take this out. The sear spring tried to fly out, but I caught it. That's trash anyway. And the old two-piece sear is really wedged in there because this one has that extra spring that puts it under tension. Okay. So here's the two pieces of the sear. These are absolutely trash. You'll never reuse these for any reason. These go in the trash bin. For our polishing job, as part of the trigger job, we're going to polish everything you see here on both sides. That's black. These little wings here need to be polished, and it's really hard to get in there, but if you can polish the insides of the sear cage, that's where the sear is going to be rubbing when you pull the trigger, because the sear will be in here. Maybe we'll put it in correctly. Sear will be in here when the gun is reassembled, and it slides against the sides here. So if you can polish these two sides, it makes the trigger pull smoother. You can polish the face of the sear here. I'm not going to, at least not initially, because you have to be careful with rolling the edges and rounding stuff. So we won't mess with that. Same with the hammer. We'll polish the sides of it here where it's inside of the gun, rubbing, but I won't touch the hammer hooks today. And that can be addressed later. And then on this guy, the top of this needs to be polished. This rubs against the bottom here of the trigger bar, which needs to be polished here. So when the gun is together, This goes in here. Wait, that goes, which way does it go? It goes in here, and when you're pulling the trigger, this spring gets compressed. As you pull the trigger, it pushes down, and there's friction here. So everything inside of here, both sides, and the flat face get polished, and this top piece gets polished, and the sides. Some people take this apart and chuck this in a drill and polish the actual shaft. I don't really feel like doing that today, so I'm not going to do that. It feels pretty smooth. The stock ones feel pretty gross. They're not machined that great, so you could probably hear. Let's see if we can do it. You can hear how bad that is when you push in and out of there. The extreme one, there's a little bit of noise in there, but it doesn't sound nearly as bad. So that will be fine. I'm not going to disassemble this. There's a tiny, tiny little pin inside here. If you push the head of this all the way down, there's a pin that goes in crossways that is captured in there and prevents the top from shooting off. If you push that pin out, this top will come off, and the pin is almost microscopic. You'll definitely lose it the first time. So that's why I bought a spare from there. So we're going to hit the garage and get the Dremel polishing wheel going. I'm going to turn the video off, and when I come back, these will all be pretty shiny, and then we'll continue. So we're back. We polished these guys. Only took a few minutes. They're just much slicker on the sides. We polished the side of the hammer down here where it sits inside the gun. We polished the top and sides of this and the sides of the sear. So we'll start putting some stuff back together. We can put the sear in the cage. So for that we need the sear spring. And to make life easier, we use a slave pin that we make. I haven't seen a whole lot of demo videos online of this, so actually we won't even use that just yet. So I'll show you guys how I do it. First thing, you need a Q-tip, which is about the perfect size for this job. So you cut one end off. These are made out of steel, apparently. Jesus. Okay, cut one end off, and you want the slave pin to be, that's fake news, you want it to be the same size as the sear. So put it through the sear and mark it on the end, and then cut it off to this length. This will capture the sear spring inside while you're reinstalling it. So let's try to do this without chopping our fingers off. How do I usually do this? Like this? So this should fit in here and not stick out on either side. Good. Okay. So get our sear spring. And now that I'm on camera, I'll forget the orientation of this thing and have to look at it for 10 minutes to decide. But this goes in here like this. So the spring goes like that. Hopefully this makes sense. The short leg goes up, the long leg goes down, and when we put it in, you'll see how that works. So we put it in like that, we trap it with our Q-tip pin, and that way when we reassemble it, it won't jump out. So we do that, and we reassemble it. It comes in from the bottom, but the long leg of the sear has to go in first, well, in about simultaneously with the leg that actuates the firing pin block, and it's a little bit fiddly, and I'm trying to hold it up for the camera, so watch me mess this up. But if we get it in like that, see, now it's a little bit off center. We want this leg on the other side. Get it in there, buddy. Okay. Now it's in there, and you can see the orientation, and it's under tension. Oh, don't fall out. When you push down, it wants to return back to its position. So now we get the sear pin, and we just have to push the Q-tip out and then it'll be captured and we're good. So we put it in, make sure we're all squared up and centered. I'm gonna have to do this down here. Push it against the table, starts to push the Q-tip out. Make sure we're lined up. Come on, buddy. Okay, I'm a little bit, there we go. All right, that was a little bit harder than it should have been, but it's probably been a couple of years since I've had to do one of these, so not bad first try, I guess. So that's in there. The sear is captured. It moves correctly. You can see the orientation. And when we go to put it back together, if you remember, this leg needs to be on top of this notch. That's how we got it disassembled, and we have to put it back in that condition when we put it back in the gun, or the thumb safety won't go back into position. So this is done. The next thing, let's see, is to put the trigger bar, nope, we're going to put the guide back in. Trigger bar, guide, or plunger, or whatever you want to call it, and the magazine catch. So this is another fiddly pain in the ass part, but get my small punch. Make sure the spring and the plunger are down inside. Okay. And we drop it in which way? It goes in this way. So let's actually go back here. So this is going to go in the frame of the gun, and the trigger bar plunger has to go in this slot while the plunger is pushed out of the way, the magazine catch plunger. So you see inside of the magazine catch, there's a spring with a metal plunger on it. That has to get pushed out of the way, and this plunger fits in there, and that's what locks it into place, and that's what puts pressure, spring return pressure on the magazine button when you push it with your thumb. So it's a little bit of a pain in the ass because you have to get everything lined up like this, push from the side with a punch until you get it out of the way, and then it'll slide right in. So let's see if we can try this here. Put that in there. Put this guy in there as far down as it wants to go. Then we're going to push on the plunger side while this is all centered up. Not quite doing it. I think because the trigger bar plunger is already in the way. Yep. Push down, slide out of the way. Done. So now the trigger bar plunger slid into place. Magazine catch is captured. It can't come out the other side. The plunger here is in place. Just slide it to line it up so it's centered like that. And there you go. It pushes down as expected. That's how that works. Now let's see what's next. We want to put the trigger bar in. And for that, we also need a slave pin, and we're going to make one. I'm sure everybody has a million of these laying around, and if you don't, you're going to have to steal one and make a part out of it. So we're going to do the same thing to make a slave pin for the trigger bar spring so that we can assemble it with less than having to have 6 hands and 8 fingers on each hand. So you want to make a pin that's the width of this part of the trigger. So we do the same thing. You put the pin in, you put the straw in, WD-40 straw if you didn't realize what this was, or any kind of can of spray, whatever. Canned air sometimes has the same thing. So you put that in there and line it up and then mark it and cut it. So, yep. So the pin fits on the carpet, never to be seen again. Yeah, that's gone. All right, let's make one again. That was a little bit too long anyway. So we're going to put it in there. Really, I could measure the distance and do this properly instead of trying to slice my fingers off. But this is how we learn, so this is how we're doing it. Better to be a hair on the short side than the long side, because if it is too long, it'll jam up this operation, it'll never work. So let me remind myself how this works for a second. Goes down there. Yeah, okay. So here's a trigger and the trigger bar. And here's your Patriot Defense reduced power trigger spring. So this goes down in front of the trigger and you push on the loop to put it under tension, and then we capture it with our new pin we made. And this is a little bit fiddly as usual. Okay, so now it's captured in there with the straw as a pin, and we can put it back in. So put it back in. Which end goes first? The back end goes first, and the trigger has to go down in the frame. But like I said, if the pin sticks out too far from the side of the trigger, it won't drop down the frame, and then you're boned, which is the situation. Nope, we're in. So we pushed it a little bit and we're good. So then you slide this down, and I'll show you once I get it in here. So the trigger's in place now, but the red pin obviously is in the way. And I'm in my own light. Go like that. And if we can get this guy in place, and the spring has to go right in that groove. There we go. You can see it would work if the pin was in there. So get everything lined up, and then we're gonna hammer this pin back in, the pin that we left in place from the initial job. And this will start to push the red pin out, and the red pin will come out the other side. So we just get it started. And I can tell that I'm hanging up on here a little bit. Okay, we're moving. And I can see the red pin is starting to come out the other side. That'll push all the way out and drop into our little gunsmith block. We need to use the punch to get the last bit of this. Looks good, and the red pin is right there. So sometimes these get chewed up a little bit, but you can usually reuse them, and it should be good. So now, gun works. Well, gun works. Trigger works. The trigger action works. We're done with that. We'll save this in our goodie bag for later. That's the hardest part. Getting the trigger bar back in is definitely the hardest part. Getting the sear back in the cage is probably the second hardest part. That's a little bit of a pain in the ass, but not a problem. And then I realized what we did is we put our hammer strut in our trash bin, but we need that. So we fetch the hammer strut. So we need this. And just so we remember, it goes towards the inside, okay. So let's punch this guy out. New hammer goes that way. This goes that way. Not protruding at all. So that is the direction the hammer strut has to go. And to put that back together, we need the Patriot interrupter. This is the R7 interrupter. It's not the Bolo. The Bolo is a gunsmith fit part, and I don't feel like it, to be honest. That's basically the main reason. My other gun has a Bolo in it. And that's been great. it took a little bit of work initially to get it in there. These ones are going to be semi-drop in. It's already tight. There we go. Perfect. That goes in there. The pin they give you is a floating pin, so that just sits in there. A little dab of grease will hold this in place for when you're putting the gun back together. If you're having a problem with the pin coming out, this doesn't want to go. This one's a little tight. There we go. It just had to pop in. Now it's good. Okay. Usually they slide fit right in. This one, yeah, that's a nice fit though. Goes right in there. Okay. So to get this guy in there, you need to put your hammer spring back in. So the hammer spring goes on the strut like this, goes down in the back of the gun like that. And the way I do it is I push down on the hammer and I capture it from the right side with the punch. Get the disconnector up out of the way. Come on, buddy, making me look bad. There we go. Okay, so it's captured with the punch. And then we're going to push the hammer pin back in. As we move the punch out of the way. There we go. That's in. And then we just wiggle the hammer a little bit to get this other side to go flush. These new guns have, ready? That's what she said. These new guns have much tighter holes than my existing gun. There we go. So they have to be lined up a little bit better, which I guess is a good thing that they're fitting them better now. So we're almost there. To put the sear back in. So you push the sear cage in from the top. There we go. When everything's lined up, there's a hole for the thumb safety to go through. You push that in, wiggle it till it snaps. Good to go. Now the issue with when you switch to the extreme hammer is I can't engage the thumb safety now. It just won't work. It doesn't fit. And that's expected, so don't worry about that. The issue is, I'll show you guys. This nub on the thumb safety is too tall because the way the hammer sits now, when the gun is in battery, this part of the sear can't clear or is in the way of the thumb safety from engaging. So you see how the thumb safety can't move? If there was more clearance here, the thumb safety could come all the way up, but now it's blocked. So you need to take a little bit at a time off of this hump here. And I use a Dremel sanding drum, and I do it in like 2 or 3 swipes, and I know what it's supposed to look like, and I'm done, and it works every time. I'd probably recommend you use a file. Here's an example of a fit one already. This is a wide thumb safety. I don't use these ones anymore, but maybe I'll put it in this gun for demonstration purposes because I don't feel like going in the other room to fit this one. Or actually, this isn't a single-sided, this is the ambi, and it'll stick out. So we're not going to use this part at all. So we'll use this one, and I'll show you what that does. So with this guy in place, yeah, see, this gun is much tighter than my other one. Still needs a little bit of fitting to work. This has to go up more to clear so that the thumb safety can go up. So this part of the sear is not letting this nub slide under. That's the safety nub that blocks the sear. So this nub has to be filed down a tiny bit so that it can go up under the sear here, and that blocks the sear. When you pull the trigger on this gun, the sear goes in that direction down. So we want this to be able to clear. What I'll probably do is see... Oh, this is an ambi safety too, so I don't want to use that one. I'm going to steal the one off my working gun, because this is my backup gun now. I'm sorry, the other gun is my backup gun now, and I don't care. Nope, doesn't work. It's close, but doesn't clear. So this is going to need fitting too. So that's no problem. Yeah, tiny amount. So we'll do that in a second. Just want to get the gun back together and see how the trigger work went. Let's put the sear leg back where it belongs. And let's put the grip back on. Because now that the ambi is never going to be used, the grips can stay on during this process. All right, so slide. Go back. That's the wrong one. That's the new one. All right, so this needs work because the trigger's not coming forward enough to fire when the gun is in battery. So that means we need to fit the interrupter, and we'll do that. So to fit the bolo, to get everything out, the trigger wasn't coming forward enough. So the back side of the bolo will need to have some material taken off. And it's not a lot either, just a tiny, tiny amount. So we're going to fit that, and we'll be back. All right, boys and girls, we're back. We got the bolo in. I'll show you what that entailed in a second. We're fitting the safety now. So this little nub is just a hair too big. So we're just going to do a couple passes with the Dremel. That's probably it. Now this one was already fit in my other gun, so it didn't take any time at all to do that. But if that was a brand new one, it takes a few more passes than what you just saw. Get that bad boy in there. All right, cock the hammer, safety on. Good. All right, so yeah, you have to really push it up for it to go on. So really it needs a little bit more off because it's not going fully up. It's clicking itself off really easy. If I push it way up, it'll engage. So, okay. So we need one more step. These wheels are really dull too. They're brand new, they suck. From China, not from Dremel. Let's push that in. There we go. Now it clicks. Clicks on nice, you can hear it click. Does what it's supposed to do. All right, so I'll show you what I did for the bolo. So basically the trigger wasn't returning all the way forward. So the material in the back of the wing here is what prevents the trigger bar from coming all the way forward. So the trigger wasn't coming out enough to reset. So that's where you take material off. And we did 5 or 6 or 10 or 50, I don't know. Dremel passes, test fit, Dremel pass, test fit. So you don't want to take too much off because a little bit goes a long way. And if you go too much, you know, you're back to having a bunch of pre-travel in there. So we went pretty slow, and I used a pretty dull sanding drum, so it wasn't taking a lot of material off at a time. We got it back in. We got it pretty much where we want it. And the pin fell out, so let's put the pin back in. The hammer pin goes in the top. When you're test fitting and stuff, don't put this in. You don't need to. But now that I'm done, I'm obviously putting it in. Should be everything. Stick the top back on. Pull it back. Alright, so we're done. Definitely a much lighter trigger pull. It's a little bit gritty still. I probably didn't spend as much time polishing as I normally do on other people's guns or my previous gun, just because I was in a hurry to get back in this room and do this video. Also, actually, we didn't do any oil in here, so alright, that's better. Alright, so this came out pretty good as far as the pre-travel, over travel. Single action. Reset. There you go. So just to go back, let's pull together all of our parts bags. We did the 15.5 pound hammer spring. For me, 14 is about the lowest I want to go because I don't want to mess around at a match. Having a gun that's not going to smash every primer, and I don't really do maintenance on my guns that often, so a 15.5 will last forever. It'll never wear out. The 14, you know, you shoot 5,000-10,000 rounds, and then you get a batch of you know, random primers these days, and it's not necessarily always going to work. So 15.5 pound hammer spring, the reduced power trigger return spring, which goes here, takes some of the pull weight off. That's not necessarily a requirement because some people like a more quickly returning gun, but it does take maybe a pound off the trigger pull, especially in double action. We did the one-piece sear, we did the extreme hammer, a firing pin I haven't put in yet, firing pins spring. We'll do that later. And that's pretty much it. So it's pretty much all drop-in stuff. All right, everybody. Looks like the GoPro battery died right at the end there. So I missed a little bit closing remarks, but we're done. Here we go. Pretty much ready to rock at this point. Trigger is pretty sweet. You can see no pre-travel there. And then the reset, get all the way up to the camera. So that's the pre-travel. And you can see the over-travel screw out of the back of the trigger. So that's the total amount the trigger can possibly move. There. Reset. So there we go. So obviously I recommend all the Patriot Defense springs, sear spring, trigger turn spring. I forgot to mention recoil springs. I have their recoil spring calibration pack. I haven't had a chance to test. Actually, it's not here yet. But they have 9, 10, 11, and 12, I think, recoil spring. And they fit in the long slide and the shorter slide model. So the stock 3 and the Defiant and the limited gun and also the stock 2 size guns. So I'll probably use a 10 or 11. I've been using a 10, so that's probably what I'll settle on. And they seem to be the go-to place to get all the parts. I like the grips. They have all the extreme Tanfo parts, regular Tanfo factory stuff, and then their own line of stuff. So check them out, and thanks for watching.